Psalm chapter number 3 and verse number 5, David talks about what I consider to be a very vulnerable time in his life. In verse number 5, he said, I laid me down and slept. And how many of you know that sometimes the night season, the nighttime, can be a very vulnerable time? In fact, the Bible said, they that are drunken in the night, and they that do this or that, or they that commit sin, sin in the night. And so for the righteous, the nighttime can be a very vulnerable time. Right? Because there's sin happening all around us. There's evil happening all around us. And so we find ourselves somewhat vulnerable at nighttime. It seems like when the sun is shining and when there's beautiful sun rays coming through my windows, it seems like I feel happy. For the most part, I feel happy, I feel excited, I feel full of joy. But it seems like at nighttime, if I'm up alone and I'm all by myself perhaps, and it's night and it's dark and it seems like I'm lonely, and sometimes I can be a very vulnerable time for me anyway. And so he said, I laid me down and I slept. I laid down at the nighttime and I slept. Have you ever been in a time in your life where everything felt good and it felt wonderful and everything was going right and you felt secure and there was goodness on the job, and there was goodness in the home, and there was goodness with your children, and there was just goodness all around you, and you felt secure, and you felt happy, and you felt invincible, and you felt like you're on top of the world? And then there's other times in your life where you feel lonely, and you feel vulnerable, and you feel like maybe the things aren't going so well, the job, maybe finances aren't going so well. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't really like those vulnerable times. I don't really like those difficult times. I like to live in the sunshine. I like to live in happiness. I like to live in peace. I like it when everything's going right. But the reality is born-again children of God, and I wish it wasn't the case. I wish I could take all of the sorrow away from people. I wish I could take all the difficult times away from people. I wish I could take all the difficult night seasons away from people. I wish that you never had to go through anything. I really do. I wish I could take it all away, and everything would always be good. But the reality is sometimes we have to go through the night season. So David talks here about the night, and he says that, look at verse number 6, he said, I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people which have set themselves against me round about. Right after he talks about the night, right after he talks about the nighttime, he talks about 10,000 people being gathered against him, 10,000s of people being gathered round about him. And something about the night, when I sleep, I can't really protect myself. When I sleep, I don't know what's going on around me. When I sleep, during the daytime, if I'm David, I can have one hand on my sword. I can have one eye, both eyes open. I can be watching around me. I can look for the enemy lurking through the darkened corners coming after me. But at the nighttime, I just kind of rest in the arms of God. At the nighttime, I just relinquish control over to him. At the nighttime, I really can't tell if somebody's coming on me unawares. I really don't know if 10,000 people are gathered against me round about. I really don't know if the enemy is knocking at my door. And the Bible said there's a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. I don't know if he chose this night to look in Jason's house and pick on Jason or hurt Jason. I don't know what the enemy's trying to do. And so at the nighttime, I find myself in a very vulnerable spot. And ladies and gentlemen, here's the reality. Even in the vulnerability of life, even in the difficulty of life, even in the struggle of life, even while we're laying down and sleeping and we cannot have one hand on the sword or both eyes open, we can trust God to protect us. We can trust God to sustain us. We can trust God that when I have both eyes shut, he has both eyes wide open, and he never sleeps, he never slumbers, and he's always going to be there for me and with me all the days of my life. So David says in Psalms chapter 3 and 5, he talks about I laid me down. Now if you look over in Psalms chapter number 4, you see the same thing. Look at verse number 8. The Bible said in verse number 8, David writing again says, I will both lay me down in peace and sleep, for thou, O Lord, only makest me dwell in safety. So again he talks about laying down. Again he talks about the night season. Again he talks about those times in my life where I go to the doctor and they tell me something's wrong, and now I got to go through a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks or months trying to figure out if I'm going to die, or trying when the boss calls me and he says, hey, we're shutting down, and now I don't have a job and I don't have a source of income, and now I feel vulnerable, and now it's the night season. Before I felt strong, before I felt secure, before I felt felt happy before I felt joy. But in this night season, I feel like I got to lay down. I feel like I got to close both eyes. I feel like I can't fight. I have no way to grab the sword because at nighttime I got to sleep. And when I sleep, I just have to trust God to protect me. I just have to trust God to sustain me. I just have to trust God to keep me. And ladies and gentlemen, there is something wonderful about laying in the arms of God and just simply trusting Him, trusting that He's got my back, trusting that He's big, trusting that He's powerful, trusting that there's nothing that I could face that He can not help me through, trusting that there's no sea that I can come in contact with that He can't open up and allow me to cross on dry ground, trusting God in the vulnerable times of my life when it's a night season all around me. If you're here today and you're in a night season, I want to tell you, trust God. If you're here today and everything's sunshine and roses and everything's going wonderful, then praise God in that moment. But if you're in a night season, if you're in a vulnerable spot, if you're in a spot where you don't know what to do, you'd fight if you could, but you got to lay down. You'd grab the sword if you could, but you got to lay down. In that moment, I implore you, just rest in the arms of God. He's never let anybody down. He's never failed anybody. He's never let anything harmful come into our lives that He didn't somehow turn for good in the midst of the night season. So trust the Lord in the night season. Trust the Lord in the difficult times. Trust the Lord in the vulnerable times of your life where you don't feel secure and you don't feel like you have it under control.